Welcome back to The Toast. In today's episode, we are hosting Steve Hilton, Republican candidate for California governor, diving deep into his political background and policy vision and how he plans to address California's agricultural economic challenges. Steve, we see you here in Fresno quite a bit. We know you have ties to the community. Would you start by introducing yourself and letting us know a little bit about what Steve Hilton is up to today?
Well, I love being in the Central Valley. I love being in Fresno, as you mentioned. I know that part of our state very, very well, and I know the industry very well. And I know there's more to the Central Valley and to Fresno and than agriculture, but it is such a beating heart of our state, and I connect very much to it because, I mean, people may know me from TV recently on Fox News and so on, but actually, and then obviously my accent is very clearly from the UK, and we moved here with my wife and my sons from the UK in 2012. I became an American in 2021, but my roots are in Hungary, and this is why I think I feel so connected to everything that's going on in Fresno and the Central Valley and in our ag industry across the state, is because where I'm from in Hungary, both my parents are Hungarian, and where I'm from in Hungary, my roots, as it were, are in a town called Szeged, which is on the south eastern side of Hungary, right at the bottom of what's known as the Great Hungarian Plain, and it's incredibly flat as far as you can see, and it's a very agriculture-dominated area. And when I was a child, we used to go back there all the time. And that's how I think of my roots. And so when I go to the Central Valley, it really reminds me of my roots. You know, we had a little farm back in the day. It was the communist era, so you only could have a little farm. No one was allowed to have a big one. But I feel very connected to the ag industry, and it breaks my heart to see how the Democrats in charge of California have been systematically crushing this great industry, this world-beating industry. And you know, over the year, each time I visit the Valley, I learn more and more about the specific details. For years now, I've been publishing policy papers at my organization, Golden Together, about how we deliver farmers the water they need. We deal with the labor regulations, the environmental regulations. There's so many things that have been done to make life difficult to impossible for farmers. And that's why you see this tragic sight of so many farms just, people giving up. Many generations of farmers, after many generations of farm being in the family, saying we just can't make it work anymore. I've heard that story many times. Converting to solar, which I think is absolutely outrageous, that we've got the most fertile farmland in the world, and we're ripping out actual farms and replacing them with solar farms. So there's a lot to address. But I think the point that I would make is the reason I'm running for governor is that I think it's the best shot we have in California for at least 20 years to really turn things around, to make some change happen. Because we've had this one-party rule for now 15 years, and it's a disaster. It's a failure on every front, on every economic issue. You know, we have the highest costs in the country on everything that matters: housing, rent, gas, water, electricity, you name it. The most expensive in the country, the worst business climate, crime is out of control, the public schools are a disaster. And fourth grade, we have the worst results in the country. That's the best predictor of where kids are going to take their lives. So you just look at what's happening, and it's a failure on every front. We've got to turn things around, and this is our best shot for a long time. And I'm running for governor because I know that we can win. There is a majority for change in California, and if we go out there, as I'm doing, with a positive, practical plan for change, I think we're going to get a really positive result next year and start to turn things around.
I agree, Steve. I just wanted to touch on the one-party rule in California. Mm-hmm. Given that you have a good opportunity to win this, what do we do about the bureaucratic red tape in agriculture? Mm-hmm. Because it's not necessarily, the California politicians per se, but more of a body of bureaucratic, non-elected government agencies that are dictating the future of California agriculture.
You're right, but we can't let the politicians off the hook, because it's the politicians, the Democrat politicians, who have enabled and empowered these bureaucratic agencies. So they've let it happen, and they've, in many cases, set them up and given them the direction that they want to follow. You see that, for example, with the climate policy extremism through the California Air Resources Board and the huge cost that has imposed on farmers and truckers and so on, and the tier 4, on and on. I could talk all day just about that part of it. And of course, you see it in every other agency, the State Water Resources Control Board, Pesticide Control Board, all these different agencies. And the good news, however, is that is actually where the governor has most ability to act, because that's the executive branch. And as the governor, you run the executive branch. And so for each one of these agencies, as governor, you will have appointments to the agencies. You can fire people, you can replace them, you can reduce the size and scope of these agencies. You can't change the law unilaterally, but you can certainly change how it's implemented. And what you're seeing with a lot of these agencies is that over the years, they've gone way beyond whatever remit that they were given. And you see it at the federal level as well. That's one of the things that's really come apparent during the Trump administration, is that you've got these federal agencies that are applying the law and going way beyond what the law intended, and they're making it up, and there's no legitimacy to that. They're not elected to do that. And so that's what we talk about when you have a national conversation about the administrative state, the deep state, the bureaucracy, the swamp, all of those things. And I always say in Sacramento, it's even worse than it is in Washington, D.C., because at least in Washington, D.C., over the years, you've had alternating Republican and Democrat governance in the form of the president. And so you've had some injection of a different way of thinking every now and again. Whereas in Sacramento, it's been a one-way street of leftism for so long that these agencies are completely infected with this kind of anti-business activist mindset. And so to me, the encouraging thing, and I think everyone should be excited about this, is that actually as governor, that's where you've got most power to act. And that's what I will do. And I'm very much right now in specific detail looking at each agency, because they all have slightly different rules, slightly different ways of appointing people, for example, and different ways in which they're making life difficult or impossible for businesses and families. I'll give you a good example. That's one of the quickest ways you can see changes, not in farming, but it relates to the Central Valley in the south, at the south end with our oil and gas industry. One of the main ways that Newsom and the Democrats have been shutting down our domestic oil and gas production in California, which of course is totally insane, given that we're still using it, and we're now importing oil from countries like Iraq halfway around the world on these giant super tankers, spewing out carbon emissions. One of the way that they've been doing that is actually something that's easily reversible. CalGEM, which is the agency responsible for that, they've just been putting people in there and telling them not to issue permits for maintaining existing wells, for drilling new ones, for expanding wells. That can be reversed very quickly. You just put people in there who've got a pro-energy attitude and tell them to issue permits. And it's going to be like that with each agency, the water board, the pesticide board, all of these agencies. I'm looking right now at what exactly are the governor's powers. How many people do you have to replace, and who are the people you need to put in there? And that's, by the way, one of the things I always say when I'm there with you in Fresno and elsewhere in the valley is, like, I need your help to tell me exactly what the priorities are and who are the people we could put in there. Because I, of course, know at the high level, I want to be a champion for California agriculture and for our farmers. Everything that you need, I want to get you. That's the sort of simple story. But there, and I know the big picture in relation to water, labor regulations, 40-hour overtime, etc. Right? But we need to go very, very much deeper, because I want to be really well prepared on day one so that I can get in there and start making a difference quickly, just as you see President Trump has been this time around with his second administration. That's the model that I want to follow in terms of preparedness for when I'm elected at the end of next year.
Awesome. I wanted to touch on, we discussed a little bit about how Democrats have a anti-business mentality in California. Could you touch a little bit more specific on your pro-business approach in California and how we keep businesses in California instead of fleeing California?
Well, it's a combination of things. this incredible growth we've seen in the size and scope of the government. They've doubled the budget of the state of California in the last 10 years. Of course, that's meant higher taxes.
Yep.
Businesses and business leaders and entrepreneurs paying so many of the taxes. So that's one reason we're driving businesses out. It's just so expensive to do business here. So you've got to reduce taxes. And my tax plan that I published when I launched my campaign is very, very focused on that. We've got to help working people because they're being hammered the most by these far left policies. You've got now in California, we've got the highest poverty rate in the country. 35% of Californians can't afford to meet their basic needs. You've got nearly 1 million Californians without access to clean drinking water, many of them in the Central Valley. So this outrageous, suffering for regular working people. So the first thing that we can do about that is to end for the first 100,000 of your earnings. My tax plan removes state income tax. So your first 100,000 grand of earnings free of state income tax. Above 100,000, a flat tax of 7.5%. That's going to be the flat tax in particular of 7.5%. That's going to make life so much easier for business because you don't have all this complicated tax code and all the nonsense that goes with that, and these very punitive tax rates because we now have the highest taxes in the country. So that's the sort of most immediate thing. And you can do that quite quickly by reducing the budget. My tax plan, I've costed it out, is 18.5% reduction in state revenue. And it's ambitious, but it just takes us back to where the budget was before the pandemic. So it's perfectly achievable. Then you look at all the other things that are making life difficult for businesses, and it's the regulations. We've talked about that a little bit with the bureaucracies in Sacramento, but it's also there's much more to it. There's the processes, the permitting, the delays, the hoops you have to go through. There's energy costs. That's a huge thing, for businesses, of course. I mean, I used to run. I've been a business owner myself. I started businesses back in the UK, including a couple of restaurants. Started a company here in California, so I know that process very well, and it's just so frustrating to me to see that you've got people making these rules who's clearly never run a business. They have no idea what it's like, and just these insane stories. I met someone has a small winery in wine country, and was telling me that they wanted to increase. They expanded their patio to increase their visitor numbers. They needed a permit to increase from 30 to 50 visitors. It took 6 years and cost $1 million in fees and inspections and in all this nonsense. Lawyers and endless nonsense. And so a lot of it is also getting in there and making sure that we simplify these processes and putting people in charge in these agencies. It's also not just state government. We've got to make sure that the counties are not doing things that make things worse. And there's a lot of duplication. Good example, I met someone who she runs a pest control company, actually in the Sierras, and including in Fresno County. And she's explained to me that you have to report. So you have to the endless reporting of what you're doing and what you're using, and you have to do it to every county that you operate in and the state board as well. And they each have different forms and different ways of uploading the information, and some is on paper and some is online, and it's all different. And I said, "Oh, what a nightmare! You have to do that every year." She said, "No, every month."
Yeah.
It's just, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? Forcing our companies to do this. So I've got a lot of experience in that. Back in the day, I mean, this is another part of my story that people may not know. Before we moved in 2012, I worked inside the UK government. I was senior advisor to the Prime Minister, to David Cameron. And one of the things I focused on was this, that, like in a way, it was the precursor of what we now think of as Doge. And I'm not saying that we succeeded in that in the UK, because actually, to be honest, we didn't have the political backing that I wanted to really push through the reforms that I would have liked to have seen. But I know how they work. I now know the tricks that they use and how you really have to, the mindset you need to battle the bureaucracy and be so forensic and detailed and following up. And I think that is I'm really excited actually about the change that I can make, bringing that kind of hustle and business mindset to this task.
I wanted to ask you a question about what prompted you to move to the United States. You had mentioned you moved to the United States in 2012. Can you give a little bit of background
Yeah,
about that decision?
it was very simple. It was our family. So my wife was then, she was working at Google, one of a big tech company, obviously, and she was in communications at Google, and she's running communications for Google globally. And I was working in 10 Downing Street when our second son was born. Um, she had a lot of travel back and forth to California, and she, because of the time difference, she was getting home very late, and we had a young baby, as well as our older son, who was a toddler then. And it just felt, for family reasons, it was just quite stressful, and so we felt that it would be better if we could all be together on the same, closer for my wife's work, and that's what we did. So that was the reason, purely for family reasons.
Amazing. On the topic of, I guess, migrating to the United States, farmers are dealing with a little bit of uncertainty in the fields pertaining to labor. As we see in the headlines, Democrats making ICE out to be the big boogeyman. But can you touch a little bit more on how you would like to approach this topic in California, specifically?
Well, first of all, I think we need to deal with this overtime issue, because it just doesn't make sense. Again, it's an example of regulations that are made by people who have no understanding of business, and in particular with farming. So you used to have, I believe, the exemption from the overtime rule, 60 hours, not 40. That's been removed now. And I know, I hear it all the time, that actually it ends up reducing the amount of income for farm workers. They're perfectly happy to work. That's the way it goes. It's seasonal, and the shifts and so on. It doesn't make any sense the way that they're doing it now. And so that's something that I'd want to look at. And of course, remember, you appoint the labor commissioner as governor and the Department of Industrial Relations. And so there's a lot of scope there, I think, for changing. You can't wave a wand and change the law, but you can change the way that it's enforced and implemented, and the bureaucracy that surrounds it. In terms of immigration and that, of course, huge conversation around agriculture that's been playing out nationally. And it is a federal issue. So as governor of California, you can't change federal law. And I think one of the problems we've had is that you've got this lack of clarity, and you see Gavin Newsom and the Democrats sort of thinking that their job is to somehow get in the way of the enforcement of federal law. And so I think that's why you've had these scenes of enforcement operations that turn into the kind of confrontation that we've seen, because they won't actually cooperate. And I think that instead of the confrontation, if we had cooperation with federal and state officials, with federal immigration enforcement, to get, and it's very clear, even within I've looked at the law, the Sanctuary State Law, SB 54, passed in 2017, includes within it the opportunity, the possibility for state and local law enforcement to use their discretion, that's the word in the bill, in the law, to work with federal immigration enforcement when it comes to people who've been convicted of a long list of crimes, obviously very serious crimes, but right down to drug possession, illegal firearms, and so on. And so that's the first point, that I think all of this could be handled better and more smoothly if you had cooperation. Secondly, when it comes to the kind of, I suppose, the more philosophical question of immigration and labor, and the arguments about labor shortages and so on, I come back to the fact that we have in California right now, we have the highest unemployment in the country, just in California, the highest rate of unemployment. And so you've got a lot of Californians who are not working, who should be working. And even behind that, the official number, there's another really important number, which is the labor force participation rate, which is the proportion of adults in California who could be working but are not working. And the participation rate is the proportion of adults who are working age adults who are working. It's historically low in California. It's down around 62%. And so if you take out people who are full-time carers, students, and whatever from the adult population, a rough calculation is that right now in California, we have between 2.5 million and 3 million people, Californians, who are not working, who could work, and we are paying them not to work. because they're on welfare, different forms of welfare. And to me, that's insane that we're paying people not to work at the same time as importing labor to do the jobs that are there. And then on top of that, because when it's illegal labor, then you don't have then workers aren't treated properly, and they'll be paid less, and importantly, don't have healthcare. And so what happens then? As we've seen, the state steps in there, and we have billions and billions of dollars being spent on illegal immigrant healthcare because the cost is not being borne by employers because they're illegal. And so this whole thing is just a complete mess, and it's costing regular hardworking taxpayers. We're paying taxes to fund millions of Californians to sit at home and do nothing and not work. And we're paying taxes to fund the healthcare of illegal immigrants who shouldn't be here. And so before we start getting into this question of importing migrant workers and so on, let's just make sure that every Californian who could work is working. That's the starting point for me. And I'll give you specific examples. I was up in a dairy in northern part of the valley. Very simple point. The guys working in the dairy were telling me they make around, these are not well paid in the overall scheme of things. Not huge salaries here, 50 grand a year, something like that. And they were telling me that their girlfriends are making more money on welfare. And they remain girlfriends. They don't get married because if they get married, then they lose some of that welfare payment. So this is insane. How is it possible that you can make more money on welfare than working in an ag job? That needs to change.
Absolutely. I attribute it to, the one party rule, wanting a type of dependency on the government. And that, to me, I believe that is the motivation. For farmers in the Central Valley, the main concern coming down the pipeline has been a program called SGMA, regulating groundwater.
Groundwater management. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I just wanted to touch a little bit on SGMA and how, what are your thoughts and how can we reverse some of these policies?
Well, I think that the point is that, there's so many connections here. First of all, we should say that the goal of sustainable groundwater management is a good goal. We don't want to deplete groundwater. I think that was the original concern, was that there's too much being drawn out and therefore you get subsidence and so on. But why is that the case? Because we've got this fake water shortage, this drought that doesn't need to be there. It's man-made because we're not capturing and storing enough water. So the root of the problem is we've got abundant water from nature, whether that's rainfall or the Sierra snowpack. We're just not capturing it and storing it. And so there's a whole policy paper. I don't want to go on and on all day about this, but you can read it on my policy organization's website, goldentogether.com, called Water Abundance. So I spent a lot of time on this issue. And I think that we need to have, if we had, and then when it comes to the farmers, of course, what you need is to get away from the current situation where you have not just the insufficient water deliveries, which is a scandal, especially when you've paid for it, but also the unpredictability and the fact that they're telling you last minute, often, after it's too late, you've been planting, you don't know how to plan. This year you're getting 15%. And then, through the season it changes, maybe 25, it's back to 10. It's just, you can't operate a business like this. It's outrageous. And so one thing that I want to make sure is that all our water, in the broader sense, all our water delivery agencies and management systems and so on, all have not just representation, but leadership from the ag industry, because that's what's needed. You've got to make sure that what's the point of the water? To serve our needs as a society. And that includes our economy. And that includes one of our greatest industries, which is agriculture. And so it's not just, to me, of stopping getting it worse. We need to prioritize agriculture in water deliveries by building more storage. I've spent a lot of time on it. I was up in Colusa County the other week. I went to the site of the site's reservoir, which should have been built. It was first talked about 70 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been held up in environmental review for decades. Insane. We just sweep all that away. Got to get it built. And there's other things as well. There's the, down in Ventura County, it's the, everyone's, now President Trump has made famous the Delta smelt and all of that and the environmental use. category, which means that the water's being sent out to the delta and into the ocean. That's a familiar story, but it's repeated in different ways. Down in Ventura County, I was with strawberry farmers telling me that they have the same issue. They have a river, and for 100 years they had, they would charge, fill up ponds and then use that for irrigation, and suddenly that's been stopped because they want to send the water straight out to the ocean in Ventura County. And there, it's not a smelt; it's some kind of trout. And you just think these people are just insane. Like we don't need to have this mindset of scarcity. There is enough water. We've just got to capture it and store it. And so I think that when it comes to Sigma, it all fits together with a policy of abundance when it comes to water, so that we can meet all our needs, consumer needs, industry, environmental. Yes, and by the way, the salmon okay, we can mock the Delta smelt. The salmon thing is a serious issue because you want salmon fishermen to have their business functioning properly. So I take that part of it seriously. But we can do all this if we just captured and stored the water that we need, and we need to have the right attitude in there. And so I feel like this is a huge, huge problem, but actually the answer to it is just common sense and putting people in there with a pro-growth, pro-abundance mindset who love our ag industry, want to see it grow and flourish.
What are some of the biggest obstacles you anticipate from the supermajority legislature or entrenched agencies?
Well, I mean, we talked about the agencies. It's a question of just removing the obstacles. You at least run them.
Yeah.
In terms of the legislature, of course, it's true that, we all know the political composition of California. I don't want to get into the whole. I mean, there's a live conversation about redistricting. And in fact, when people talk about the supermajority in the California legislature, the part they leave out is that it's not a legitimate supermajority because it's the product of Democrat gerrymandering. Very roughly speaking, even if you take the Republican share of the vote in a bad year when it's not particularly a successful campaign, you get 40% Republican vote on average. That's been very steady. We have roughly 20% of the seats in the legislature. So half the representation that our actual support in the state would warrant. So that needs to be addressed. But that's not going to be addressed on day one. That's a longer term thing. My starting point will be to say, look, when I'm elected governor and I take office in early 2027, that will have been a political revolution in California. The people clearly will have voted for change. And so I will expect the legislature to work with me to implement the agenda and the platform that I ran on and people voted for. That's my starting point. And I hope that these people who lecture us endlessly about our democracy and how important democracy is, let's see them honor that vote by working with me to implement the agenda. But if they don't, then there are many other tools at my disposal. Of course, as governor, not just the executive branch, you can veto legislation, you can challenge legislation that you think is unconstitutional, violates the California Constitution. I'm very happy to do that. You appoint judges, executive orders, emergency power. I don't necessarily want to go down that road. I want to work with the legislature, and so that would be my starting point.
I've always asked myself. You mentioned 40% of the vote, but I find it interesting, and I wanted to know your thoughts on what business does the Department of Motor Vehicles have registering voters if those IDs are not required to vote?
Well, of course, one of the things that is going to be very important for next year is voter ID, because there's a ballot initiative that's in the works. I'm a strong supporter of it. Carl DeMaio down in San Diego has been a big part of leading that. He's obviously in the assembly now. And so I think we need to really focus on that. And that will be a vehicle for sorting out some of these problems with our voting system, which have completely kind of lost the confidence of Californians. But, we've got the system we have. And I always make the point that we have to win according to the rules that are in front of us before we have the chance to change them. And so there's no substitute really for going for as big a vote as possible, for doing everything we can to turn out the vote certainly in the primary, but in the general election next November. And remember that over 60% of Californians think the state's going in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
There's a majority for change in California. We just need to be there with a positive plan to meet that and have people vote for it.
Steve, is there a place farmers or concerned citizens could reach you at? An email. I know you mentioned you wanted to be ready to hit the ground running in your first 90 days. Do you have any advice to farmers or citizens out there?
I'm there the whole time, and so I'd say keep an eye on our events, sign up for our emails,
Okay.
and go to stevehilton4governor.com and Steve Hilton 4. We're having a bit of a problem with Google in terms of how that site is showing up, but if you type it in, you'll get there. Steve Hilton 4 FORgovernor.com, and let's stay in touch that way. And I think that I'm talking to people in the industry all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've a good network of people that are giving me great advice, and I want to grow that. And I'll be doing lots of events in the Central Valley. I'll be there soon. Would love to see everyone there.
Perfect. All right, Steve, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We really appreciate your time educating our audience on all the initiatives that you would like to see enacted. Thank you very much.
Of course, it's a great pleasure. Thank you. And of course, keep up with the campaign. You can follow me at Steve Hilton X.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.